This is Borovsk 1 facility, a weapons storage southwest of Moscow. It's one of the many storages that houses Russia's nuclear warheads. A little over a week ago, Putin ordered his military to put the nuclear deterrence forces on high alert. The Russian military is thus likely in the process of bringing its nuclear arsenal of Borovsk 1, among others, to a state of combat readiness. Now, what if Russia, in a last-ditch attempt to win the war in Ukraine, dropped a nuclear bomb that landed nearby a NATO state like Poland or Romania? Or what if a stray missile hit one of Ukraine's nuclear power plants, with radiation spreading into the neighboring countries? One mistake is all it takes to bring Russia and NATO to thermonuclear annihilation. Understandably, anxieties are running high. World War III hasn't been this close since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So, is this just political brinkmanship, or are NATO and Russia sleepwalking into World War III? Today's video is sponsored by Masterworks. The conflict in Ukraine is doing a number on global markets. Oil is hitting roughly $130 a barrel. Gas is reaching $7 a gallon, and almost a third of the world's supply of wheat is unavailable for harvest. Grocery bills are bound to go up, and people are already scrambling. In normal times, one could invest in real estate and gold, but the former is in a massive bubble and the latter is being driven up because of global instability. That's why I am diversifying my portfolio with blue chip art. Masterworks is the platform I use. According to Deloitte, the total wealth held in art is projected to grow from the current $1.7 trillion to $2.6 trillion by 2026. That's astonishing growth, but nothing out of the ordinary. From 1995 to 2021, contemporary art prices have outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164%. By using Masterworks, retail investors like myself can invest in fine art and own a slice of Banksy, while also diversifying my portfolio with blue chip art. Use the link in the description to gain priority access. Doing so helps our channel, so check it out. Just be careful in everything related to investing. Nothing is risk-free. The war in Ukraine is the most dangerous conflict in Europe since the end of World War II, including the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. As horrible as the Balkan Wars were, the Ukraine war is worse, because it has the potential of transforming into a real European war, a world war if you will. And while some people find the idea of playing with fire exciting, nuclear bombs take all the thrill out of war. NATO member states are supplying Ukraine with weapons, but have ruled out the idea of sending troops or imposing a no-fly zone. Doing either would mean killing Russians, putting NATO and Russia on a fast lane into World War III. But every day the military situation gets deeper and deeper. Heavy fighting has been recorded near the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, while the Chernobyl power plant reported a power failure. Incidents like these risk spillover into neighboring countries, and the longer the fight continues, the bigger the risk of something going wrong. One stray missile, one airspace violation, that's all it takes to set off an inadvertent escalation. Most NATO weapon deliveries to Ukraine go through Poland, and as the Russian war machine steadily moves into western Ukraine, Russian warplanes could start bombing those NATO convoys entering Ukraine. Or, while pursuing Ukrainian jets, Russian fighters could violate Polish airspace. There are a lot of ways things could go wrong. In Syria, as part of its siege on Aleppo, Russian tactical warplanes bombed supply lines coming from Turkey. In 2015, one of the Russian bombers violated Turkish airspace and was shot down. A similar scenario could take shape along the Polish-Ukrainian border. NATO would then face a situation where it could do either nothing and let it be a local issue, which happened in Turkey in 2015, or the pressure to do something could force NATO's hand. Either way, an unintentional attack would risk spillover into NATO territory.
Yes, we were talking about non-fly zone. We agreed that it would be extremely dangerous, having in mind that there will be instructions to shoot down Russian planes in this non-fly zone, and probably it would mean the start of the Third World War.
Although the Kremlin and the White House seek to avoid expanding the conflict, Russia's vast nuclear arsenal magnifies apprehensions. Currently, the most pressing scenario that could trigger a global conflict would be NATO imposing a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which the Ukrainian government has been insisting on. In case of a no-fly zone, American and NATO jets would be attacking Russian aircraft in the air and Russian air defenses on the ground. Russia could retaliate by hitting Ukrainian targets with non-strategic nuclear weapons as a message to NATO to back off. Now, these are weapons with enormous destructive potential that can spill over into NATO territory. The fog of war would make it difficult to verify events, and the situation could spiral out of control faster than anyone would like. An attack on the territory of a NATO member state, even an accidental attack, could trigger collective defense under Article 5, where an attack on one member is considered an attack on all member states. NATO forces would come in direct contact with Russian forces, which would amount to a Russia-NATO war. That war would likely go nuclear, since it's the only way Russia could equalize the playing field when facing the combined power of NATO. That's a scary thought, and the reason why so many policymakers are anxious that the war in Ukraine could be a prelude to a global conflict. Now, much of Putin's decision-making in Ukraine is seen as audacious and self-damaging. So the immediate question is, can Putin launch nuclear weapons by himself? Does Russia have a one-man button for its nukes? The answer to this depends on the launch procedure. If it's a retaliatory strike, the Russian launch authorization procedure provides safeguards against false alarms or rash decisions. However, when it comes to a deliberate first strike, the safeguards can be bypassed. According to Colonel Valery Yarinich, who served as a specialist in command, control and communications in the Soviet strategic rocket forces, Russian launch authorization is not performed by one person. So if Putin gives the order to launch nuclear missiles, it must first be authenticated by the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff through the Chegit nuclear briefcase. They would have veto power, but the current office holders are both loyalists to Putin. But for argument's sake, suppose they didn't validate the launch authorization, Putin could simply replace the defense minister or the chief of the general staff at the last minute. So, yes, Putin can circumvent the safeguards when it comes to a deliberate first strike. And seemingly, that is what he did on February 27 when he authorized his military to put the nuclear deterrence forces on high alert.
Поэтому приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба перевести силы сдерживания российской армии в особый режим несения боевого дежурства.
Media outlets picked up on this bit and printed all sorts of doomsday stories. The reality is somewhat different, and in the case of Ukraine, it's also a bit more complex. Russian military doctrine allows for the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons in conventional conflicts. In fact, they call it tailored damage. And in the past, they've held large-scale military exercises that featured simulations of non-strategic nuclear strikes. For context, to distinguish between strategic and non-strategic nuclear weapons, strategic weapons refer to long-range delivery systems with high-yield warheads, while non-strategic weapons refers to short-range delivery systems with low-yield warheads. Non-strategic nuclear weapons can be effective on the battlefield since they can attack troops, air bases, seaports, or facilities. So when Putin raised the combat condition of his nuclear forces, he was likely referring to non-strategic delivery systems. In normal circumstances, non-strategic nuclear weapons are kept in a dormant state across Russia. There are no vehicles roaming about ready to fire at will. That's not how any of this works, at least not for non-strategic weapons with short-range delivery systems and low-yield warheads. Instead, Russia's nuclear bombs sit in storage spread across its vast territory. Each symbol you see on this map houses nuclear weapons, and each symbol represents a different combat arm. The exact number of warheads is unknown due to security concerns, but the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists says that Russia holds 1,912 non-strategic warheads in its reserve. That is in addition to the strategic arsenal of 4,447 warheads, of which 1,588 are already deployed to land-based ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and heavy bomber aircraft. Strategic weapons such as ICBMs, which is the stuff you usually see in the movies, have a yield between 300 and 800 kilotons. For comparison, the two bombs that exploded over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan were in the 10 to 20 kiloton range. Meanwhile, a modern 300 kiloton warhead should be enough to destroy a large metropolitan area like Paris or London, wiping out the entire population. That is terrifying. But since Putin has his sights on Ukraine and its capital Kiev, he would likely employ, if any, smaller non-strategic nuclear weapons as opposed to ICBMs. Thus, when Putin authorized his military to put the nuclear deterrence forces on high alert, he wasn't referring to long-range ICBMs, but short-range non-strategic delivery systems. The 2S-7 Pion is one such example. It is a self-propelled heavy artillery piece with a range of about 37 kilometers. It can be retrofitted to fire nuclear shells, each carrying a yield of about 1 kiloton. Another example is the Iskander missile, which has a range of about 500 kilometers and can fire a nuclear weapon with a yield of between 5 and 50 kilotons. That range and yield would be devastating on the battlefield, and it would be entirely permissible by Russian military doctrine. So while Putin can circumvent the safeguards for the launch authorization procedure for a strategic first strike, he is unlikely to do so. The Kremlin has made it clear that its military goals are limited to Ukraine, while the White House has stated that it will not send troops into the conflict. Both sides are playing down a direct confrontation. But things can change quickly during wartime, especially as Russian forces move into western Ukraine or as Russia increases the lethality of its military campaign. Inadvertent actions are just a matter of time. On the off chance that Russia goes nuclear, it would likely opt for non-strategic strikes, which is already embedded in Russia's military doctrine. The kiloton yield would probably be on the low end, as not to cross any NATO red lines. Seen in this way, a nuclear war is improbable. The norm against the employment of nuclear weapons is strong enough that it has lasted for decades. For Ukraine, however, it can go every which way, though the nuclear strikes would be degraded to fit the tailored damage dogma. A pessimist will say that nuclear war is inevitable. An optimist will say that nuclear war is impossible, but a realist will say that nuclear war is inevitable unless it is made impossible. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. We will be making more of these Ukraine-related videos, so if you haven't yet subscribed, now is a good time to do so. Just remember to click on the bell icon so you don't miss out. Thank you for watching, and Sahol.